My sister was smiling before the lawyer even opened my grandmother's will. That was the first thing I noticed. Everyone else in the room looked tired, heartbroken, or uncomfortable, but Vanessa looked like she was waiting for a prize to be handed to her. She sat beside my parents in a white designer suit, her hair perfect, her makeup flawless, her diamond bracelet shining every time she moved her hand. My grandmother had been buried only 3 days earlier, and I still felt like I couldn't breathe without crying. But Vanessa looked almost excited. I sat at the far end of the long conference table, holding a tissue in my hand, staring at the leather folder in front of the lawyer. Inside that folder was my grandmother's final will, and I honestly didn't care what was written in it. I would have given up every dollar just to hear her voice one more time. My grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, was the only person in my family who ever truly understood me. She was rich, yes, very rich. She owned a mansion, investment properties, stocks, antiques, jewelry, and a lake house that everyone in the family secretly wanted. But to me, she was never just money. She was warmth. She was safety. She was the person who remembered my birthday when my parents forgot. She was the person who taught me how to bake apple pie, how to write thank you notes, and how to walk away from people who only loved what they could take from you. Vanessa never understood that. To her, Grandma was an old woman sitting on a fortune. Growing up, Vanessa had always been the favorite. She was beautiful, loud, charming, and impossible to ignore. If she broke something, she blamed someone else. If she lied, she cried until people believed her. If she wanted something, she knew exactly how to get it. My parents called her spirited. Grandma called her dangerous when no one is watching. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the daughter who showed up early, stayed late, remembered appointments, sent flowers, and apologized even when I wasn't wrong. My parents often said I was too serious, but Grandma once told me that seriousness was not a flaw when it came from love. During the last year of her life, Grandma became weaker. Her hands shook when she poured tea. Her knees hurt when she climbed stairs. She stopped driving. She forgot small things, like where she placed her glasses, but she never forgot people's true nature. Every Saturday, I visited her. At first, I came with groceries and flowers. Then I started coming more often. I took her to doctor appointments, organized her medication, cooked soup when she didn't feel hungry, and sat beside her on the porch while she told me stories about her younger days. Vanessa rarely came. When she did, she stayed 20 minutes, took selfies with Grandma, posted captions about family love, and left before the dishes were cleared. My parents noticed nothing, or maybe they didn't want to. Grandma noticed everything. One Saturday afternoon, I arrived with groceries and found Vanessa in the living room. That alone surprised me. She almost never visited without being asked. She was sitting close to Grandma with papers spread across the coffee table. The second I walked in, Vanessa jumped up and started gathering the documents. Grandma looked tired, but her eyes were sharp. I asked if everything was okay, and Vanessa laughed too quickly. She said she was just helping Grandma with some paperwork. Then she kissed Grandma on the cheek and left in a hurry. After she was gone, I saw Grandma staring at the closed door. I asked if Vanessa had been asking about money. Grandma didn't answer right away. Then she looked at me and said, "Money does not change people, Emily. It reveals them." I remember that sentence because at the time it sounded like wisdom. Later, it would sound like a warning. A few weeks before Grandma died, she gave me a small wooden box. It was old, polished, and locked with a tiny brass latch. I asked what was inside, but she only smiled. She told me to keep it somewhere safe and not open it until the truth became necessary. I thought she was being sentimental. I placed the box in my closet at home and, because the days that followed became so heavy with hospital visits and fear, I almost forgot about it. Then Grandma passed away peacefully in her sleep, and everything changed. At the funeral, Vanessa cried loudly, but she kept checking her phone. My mother whispered to relatives about the mansion. My father asked the attorney when the will would be read. I hated all of it. I wanted someone to talk about Grandma's laugh, her garden, her old songs, the way she would hold my hand when she knew I was sad. But everyone seemed to circle around the same unspoken question. Who was getting what? 3 days later, we gathered in the attorney's office. The lawyer, Mr. Harris, was an older man with silver hair and tired eyes. He had worked with Grandma for years. He greeted me gently and told me he was sorry for my loss. When he said that, I almost cried because he sounded more sincere than my own family. Vanessa sat forward in her chair like a student waiting for exam results she already knew. My mother kept smoothing her skirt. My father checked his watch. Mr. Harris opened the folder and began reading. At first, the words felt distant. Legal language. Formal sentences. Then the names started coming. The lake house went to Vanessa. The investment portfolio went to Vanessa. The jewelry collection went to Vanessa. The mansion went to Vanessa. The primary accounts went to Vanessa. I sat frozen. My chest felt tight, but not because of the money. It was the shock. It made no sense. Grandma had never been unfair. She had never rewarded greed. She had never once made me feel invisible. Yet here I was, listening as everything she owned passed to the one person who had barely visited her. Vanessa lowered her eyes, pretending to be humble, but I saw the smile pulling at her lips. My mother looked stunned, then pleased. My father nodded slowly, like the decision made sense. Then Vanessa turned slightly toward me and whispered, "I guess Grandma knew who deserved it." That was the moment grief turned into something colder. I didn't speak. I didn't want to fight over money in the room where my grandmother's final wishes were being read. I just looked at Mr. Harris, waiting for him to finish so I could leave. But then he stopped. His eyes moved across the page. His forehead tightened. He turned one sheet, then another. Vanessa noticed first. She asked if there was a problem. Mr. Harris didn't answer immediately. He reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. The envelope had my grandmother's handwriting on it. My name was written across the front. Emily. My heart started pounding. Vanessa's smile disappeared. My mother sat straighter. My father finally stopped checking his watch. Mr. Harris cleared his throat and said, "There is one final clause in the will." The room went completely silent. He opened the envelope carefully, as if he already knew this was the part Grandma had truly wanted us to hear. Then he began reading her words. The clause said that the distribution just announced was conditional. Conditional. That single word changed the air in the room. Vanessa's face went pale. Mr. Harris continued. Grandma had written that any heir receiving the major estate must prove they had acted in good faith during the final year of her life. If evidence showed manipulation, pressure, emotional coercion, or false representation, the inheritance would be immediately revoked and transferred to the family member who had provided genuine care without expectation of payment. My hands began to shake. Vanessa stood up and said this was ridiculous. Mr. Harris raised one hand and told her to sit down. Then he looked directly at me. He said Grandma had left instructions that, if the clause was triggered, I was to open the wooden box she had given me before her death. Suddenly I remembered it. The box in my closet. The box I had almost forgotten. Vanessa looked at me with pure panic in her eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw something behind her confidence. Fear. Mr. Harris closed the document and said the will reading would be paused until the contents of the box were reviewed. My father demanded to know what was inside. Mr. Harris said he didn't know. My mother asked why Grandma would do this. Mr. Harris looked at all of us and quietly said, because Mrs. Whitmore suspected someone was trying to influence her estate. Nobody spoke. Vanessa grabbed her purse and said she was leaving. But before she reached the door, Mr. Harris said one more thing. He said, until this matter is resolved, no assets will be transferred. Vanessa turned around slowly, and all the joy she had carried into that room was gone. I stood up without saying a word. My legs felt weak, but something inside me felt awake. For months, I had thought Grandma's final gift to me was that wooden box. Now I realized it might not be a gift at all. It might be proof. And as I walked out of the attorney's office with my family staring behind me, one thought echoed in my mind. Grandma had known. She had known everything. I drove home in complete silence. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to pull over twice. I couldn't stop thinking about my grandmother's words. She had suspected someone was trying to influence her estate. She had left me a box. She had written a secret clause into her will. None of it made sense, but one thing was clear. Grandma knew something that I didn't. The second I walked into my apartment, I went straight to my bedroom. I opened my closet and pulled out the wooden box. It looked exactly the same as the day she had given it to me. I sat on the floor holding it in my hands. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. It felt like opening one final piece of my grandmother. Finally, I lifted the latch. Inside were several envelopes tied together with a blue ribbon. Under them was a small notebook and a silver key. I stared at everything in confusion. The first envelope had my name written on it. I opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter from Grandma. "My dearest Emily, if you are reading this, then I was right. Someone cared more about my money than my memory. I hoped I was wrong, but I have lived long enough to trust my instincts. You have spent the last year taking care of me without asking for anything in return. You never once asked about my accounts, my properties, or my will. You only asked if I had eaten and whether I was feeling better. That is why I am leaving you the truth." I stopped reading. Tears filled my eyes. I could almost hear her voice. I continued. "The person trying to manipulate my estate is your sister. Over the past year, Vanessa has repeatedly pressured me to discuss my money. She has brought legal papers to my home and attempted to convince me to change my will. I pretended not to notice because I needed to know how far she would go. I felt my heart start pounding. I kept reading. Everything you need is inside this box. Trust yourself, Emily. I have always trusted you." I lowered the letter. I couldn't breathe. My grandmother had known. She had known everything. I looked at the remaining envelopes. One by one, I opened them. Inside were copies of text messages, notes, dates, photographs. There were even handwritten records of every visit she had received during the last year. My name appeared constantly. Saturday, Tuesday, Thursday, doctor appointment, dinner, medication, grocery shopping. Then I looked at Vanessa's visits. 3 in 11 months. 3. I sat there in complete shock. Then I opened the notebook. Inside was something even more unbelievable. Grandma had kept a journal. Every page described events from her final year. She had written about me bringing soup when she had a fever. She had written about me staying all night at the hospital. She had written about how I read books to her when she couldn't sleep. Then I reached a page that made my stomach drop. Vanessa visited today. She brought paperwork again. She asked if I intended to divide the estate equally. I said I hadn't decided. She became angry. She reminded me that she deserved more because she had bigger plans for her future. I turned another page. Vanessa arrived unexpectedly. She brought a new version of my will and suggested I sign it while I was tired because she knew I disliked legal meetings. I stopped. A new version of the will. I kept reading. I refused to sign. She looked disappointed. I closed the journal. I suddenly understood why Grandma had hidden everything. She was protecting herself. And she was protecting me. My phone rang. It was my mother. I answered. She immediately asked what was inside the box. I didn't answer. She asked again. I finally said I was still reading everything. Then she said something strange. She asked me not to make assumptions about Vanessa. I frowned. I asked why she would say that. She hesitated. Then she said Vanessa was very upset. I almost laughed. Upset. I had just discovered that my sister might have tried to manipulate our dying grandmother. But somehow everyone was worried about her feelings. I told my mother we would talk tomorrow. Then I ended the call. An hour later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it. Vanessa was standing there. She looked nervous. That alone was unusual. She asked if she could come inside. I didn't answer. She smiled awkwardly and walked in anyway. Then she looked at the wooden box sitting on the table. I watched her expression change. She knew exactly what it was. She asked if I had opened it. I said yes. She swallowed. Then she sat down. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she smiled. It looked forced. She said Grandma could be forgetful near the end. I stared at her. She continued. She said older people often misunderstood situations. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked if she was calling Grandma confused. She quickly changed her words. Then she said something even worse. She said maybe Grandma had exaggerated things. Exaggerated. I felt anger rising inside me. I asked her about the paperwork. She froze. I asked her how many times she had brought legal documents to Grandma's house. She looked shocked. Then she asked how I knew about that. I didn't answer. She suddenly stood up. She began pacing around my living room. Then she said something I will never forget. She said she deserved the inheritance. I looked at her. She said she had bigger dreams. She said she wanted to travel, start businesses, live a certain lifestyle. Then she looked directly into my eyes. And she said something unbelievable. She said I didn't need the money because I was used to taking care of people anyway. I couldn't believe my ears. I asked if she seriously thought kindness made someone deserve less. She looked annoyed. Then she said our grandmother had always preferred me. I almost laughed. Preferred me. Grandma simply saw us clearly. There was a difference. Then Vanessa did something strange. She sat down again. Her eyes filled with tears. She said she was scared. I had never seen my sister look afraid. She admitted that she had debts. A lot of debts. Credit cards. Loans. Bad investments. She said she needed the inheritance. Needed. I looked at her for a long time. Then I realized something. This had never been about Grandma. This had always been about money. She wasn't grieving. She was desperate. Suddenly, everything made sense. The unexpected visits. The questions about the estate. The legal documents. The pressure. Everything. I asked her one final question. I asked if she had tried to convince Grandma to change her will. She looked away. That was answer enough. I asked again. Finally, she nodded. I couldn't speak. She had really done it. She had tried to influence our dying grandmother. Then she looked at me. Her voice became soft. She asked me not to tell anyone. I stared at her. She asked me to destroy the journal. She asked me to forget everything. Then she made an offer. She said we could split the inheritance. 50-50. I almost laughed. She still thought this was about money. I looked directly into her eyes. Then I quietly said no. Her face changed. She asked if I was serious. I nodded. Then I said something that made her go completely pale. I told her I wasn't going to hide the truth. Because Grandma deserved better than this. And for the first time in my life, my sister looked genuinely afraid. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Mr. Harris, the attorney. He asked me to bring the wooden box to his office immediately. I looked at the journal. I looked at my grandmother's letter. Then I looked out the next morning, I barely slept. I kept rereading my grandmother's letter and staring at the journal she had left behind. Every page felt like she was sitting beside me, telling me exactly what had happened. I wasn't angry anymore. I was heartbroken. My grandmother had spent the final year of her life realizing that one of her granddaughters wanted her money more than her love. At 10 o'clock, I arrived at Mr. Harris's office carrying the wooden box. When I entered the conference room, everyone was already there. My father looked nervous. My mother looked exhausted. Vanessa looked terrified. Mr. Harris stood and asked me to sit down. Then he carefully opened the wooden box. The room became silent. He read my grandmother's letter. Nobody moved. Then he opened the journal. Page after page. Entry after entry. Date after date. He read everything. He read about my visits. He read about my helping with doctor appointments. He read about hospital nights. He read about grocery shopping. Then he reached the entries about Vanessa. The room suddenly felt colder. He read about the legal documents. He read about the pressure. He read about the repeated conversations about money. Finally, he stopped. Nobody spoke. My father looked at Vanessa. My mother looked like she couldn't breathe. Vanessa stared at the floor. Then Mr. Harris opened one final envelope. Inside were photographs. The first photo showed me sitting beside Grandma in the hospital. The second showed us planting flowers together. The third showed me helping her into her wheelchair. Then he held up another photograph. Vanessa was in it. She was standing beside Grandma. But she wasn't looking at Grandma. She was pointing at documents spread across the table. Mr. Harris lowered the picture. Then he said something that changed everything. He said that Mrs. Whitmore had instructed him to immediately activate the secret clause if evidence of manipulation existed. He looked around the room. Then he looked directly at Vanessa. And he said the evidence was overwhelming. Vanessa suddenly stood up. She said this was ridiculous. She said Grandma was old. She said her memory wasn't reliable. The second those words left her mouth, my father looked at her in disbelief. I had never seen him look at my sister like that before. Mr. Harris remained calm. Then he reached into his briefcase. He removed another envelope. I frowned. I had never seen it before. He explained that my grandmother had given it to him 6 months before her death. He opened it. Inside was a small flash drive. The room became silent. Mr. Harris inserted it into his laptop. Then he pressed play. Suddenly, my grandmother appeared on the screen. It was clearly recorded in her living room. She looked tired. But her eyes were bright. She smiled. Then she began speaking. If you are watching this, then I was right. Nobody moved. I have spent my entire life studying people. I know when someone loves me, and I know when someone loves what I own. I felt tears forming. Grandma continued. Emily never once asked about my money. Not once. She asked if I needed soup. She asked if I wanted company. She sat beside me when I couldn't sleep. My mother started crying. Then Grandma continued. Vanessa visited me only to discuss my estate. She pressured me repeatedly to change my will. I refused every time. The room became completely silent. Then Grandma smiled sadly. This video exists because I never wanted there to be confusion. Kindness matters. Loyalty matters. Character matters. And if I leave this world with one final wish, it is this: reward love, not greed. Then the video ended. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Vanessa looked completely pale. My mother was openly crying. My father stared at the dark laptop screen. For the first time in my life, I saw him look truly ashamed. Then Vanessa suddenly stood up. She said Grandma was being unfair. Nobody reacted. She said she deserved the money. Still nobody reacted. Then she started crying. She said she had debts. She said she needed the inheritance. Mr. Harris quietly interrupted her. He explained that need and entitlement were not the same thing. Vanessa looked at me. Then she said something unbelievable. She asked me to tell everyone she wasn't a bad person. I looked at her. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to yell. But suddenly I just felt tired. I saw my sister differently now. Not as a villain. Not as a winner. I saw someone who had spent her entire life chasing things that could never make her happy. Then Mr. Harris cleared his throat. He announced that under the secret clause, all major assets previously assigned to Vanessa were immediately revoked. The room became silent again. Then he continued. Mrs. Whitmore's estate, including the mansion, the investment accounts, the stock portfolio, and the lake house, would now be transferred to the family member who had provided genuine care and demonstrated selfless loyalty during her final year. Then he looked directly at me and said my name, Emily Whitmore. I couldn't breathe. I wasn't expecting it. I never wanted this. I never came for money. I came for Grandma. Tears rolled down my face. My hands were shaking. My mother covered her mouth. My father looked at me. Then something happened that had never happened before. My father stood up. He walked around the table. And he hugged me. I froze. I honestly couldn't remember the last time he had done that. His voice cracked. Then he said something I had waited my entire life to hear. "I'm sorry." I started crying harder. He looked at me and said he had spent years praising confidence while ignoring kindness. He said he was proud of my sister because she demanded attention. But he had taken me for granted because I was always there. Then he looked directly into my eyes and said he was wrong. My mother came over next. She hugged me too. She apologized for never noticing how much I gave to everyone around me. Then she said something that made me cry even more. She said Grandma had seen me clearly all along. I looked at the empty chair where my grandmother should have been. I wished she could have heard all of it. Across the room, Vanessa was crying quietly. Nobody knew what to say. Finally, she stood up. She looked at me. Then she apologized. Not perfectly. Not dramatically. Just honestly. She admitted she had become obsessed with money. She admitted she had been jealous of my relationship with Grandma. Then she said she was sorry. For a long time, I looked at her. I remembered every cruel comment. Every insult. Every moment she tried to make me feel small. Then I remembered something Grandma once told me. She said resentment is like carrying a heavy suitcase. Eventually, you realize you're the one holding it. I took a deep breath. Then I told Vanessa I forgave her. Not because she deserved it. Not because I forgot. But because I didn't want to carry that suitcase anymore. She started crying again. A few weeks later, I moved into Grandma's mansion. Not because I wanted luxury. Because it felt like home. I restored her garden. I kept her books exactly where she left them. I placed her favorite photograph beside my bed. Then I used part of the inheritance to create something she would have loved. The Eleanor Whitmore Foundation. A charity that provides support for elderly people who live alone. On opening day, my parents came. Vanessa came too. We planted a tree in the garden. Under it, we placed a small plaque. It read, "Reward love, not greed." I looked at those words for a long time. Then I smiled. Because in the end, Grandma's greatest inheritance wasn't the mansion. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the investments. It was the lesson she left behind. Money reveals character. And love reveals everything else. My sister thought she had stolen my inheritance. But she never understood something my grandmother knew all along. The greatest fortunes in life are not won by the people who take the most. They're earned by the people who give the most. And in the end, love inherited everything.